When I was 20, I got into a relationship with someone I'll call Jackass X. He was also 20 and we went to the same school. What started as a typical first serious relationship quickly spiraled into something I could have never predicted. By the end, I realized I had been manipulated, betrayed, and, worst of all, sexually assaulted. This story is about everything that happened during and after our relationship and how, ultimately, his own choices destroyed his life. We started dating in December. By May, I had broken up with him. At the time, I was taking a semester off from school and working full-time as a manager at a job I'd held for years. He was still fully focused on school and heavily involved in a student-run design group that he had been part of for a long time. This group was his pride and joy, and almost all his friends were connected to it. Early on, things moved fast. We spent a lot of time together, and I was excited about the relationship. He even shared a traumatic story about being falsely accused of sexual assault in high school, and I felt awful for him. At the time, I believed every word he said, and even reassured him that I knew he'd never do something like that. But as the months went on, red flags started to pop up. He would make manipulative comments, act jealous, and push boundaries. By the third month, I was starting to have doubts, not just about the relationship but about my own feelings and attraction to him. I questioned myself constantly, trying to figure out if the problems were in my head or if something was really wrong. The breaking point came in early May. One morning, while I was asleep at his apartment, he assaulted me. At the time, I didn't even fully process what had happened. I just felt sick and confused. A few days later, he suggested we take a break, and while I agreed, I knew deep down the relationship was over. Eventually, I ended things over the phone, feeling guilty and broken, but thinking it was all somehow my fault. It took months for me to come to terms with what he had done. When I finally did, I knew I couldn't just let it go. He needed to be held accountable, and I needed closure. What happened next would unravel his life in ways even I didn't expect. Looking back, the relationship was doomed long before I fully understood why. By the third month, I had started noticing things that felt off. He'd make manipulative comments or behave in ways that chipped away at my confidence. For example, he'd ask if I was really gay when I wasn't in the mood to be physical, as though my reluctance to engage was somehow proof I didn't belong in the relationship. He was pushy and jealous, often making crude, sexual remarks about mutual acquaintances, which seemed like attempts to provoke me. I tried to brush these things off, but they stuck with me. We both ran for leadership positions in the student-run design group he loved so much. I took on a treasury role while he was given a project manager position. I joined partly because I wanted to support him, but his behavior made it hard to work together. He was cold and dismissive in group settings, often ignoring me or failing to communicate about shared tasks. I chalked it up to stress, but the distance between us kept growing. In early May, everything fell apart. One night, I was staying at his place and had to work early the next morning. I remember him trying to initiate something around 3:30 a.m., and I told him no, I needed to sleep. I thought that was the end of it. But later, I woke up to find him on top of me. I was groggy and disoriented, and before I could process what was happening, he finished. He didn't say a word, and I went straight to the shower, feeling numb and confused. As I was about to leave for work, he stopped me and said we should take a break. I didn't argue. In fact, I felt relieved. I left his apartment that morning thinking I had done something wrong, but also feeling like I couldn't stay in this relationship anymore. The break gave me space to think, and I started to see things more clearly. A few days later, he called, saying he wanted to get back together. Reluctantly, I agreed, but my heart wasn't in it. We barely spoke after that. A week later, he left me a voicemail with an ultimatum: commit to fixing things or let him move on. That was the final straw. I broke up with him over the phone, reading a short letter I'd written. He begged me to reconsider, but I didn't budge. Summer gave me some time to heal. I focused on work, made new friends, and got ready to return to school. When classes started again, I saw him for the first time with someone new. He acted like I didn't exist, but I couldn't help laughing at the sight of him with another guy. It was clear how manipulative his pleas to fix things had been. Still, I thought that was the end of it, until the memories of what happened that May morning came rushing back. I'd pushed them out of my mind, trying to rationalize or minimize them. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized what had happened. I'd been sexually assaulted. At first, I didn't know how to handle it. I coped by joking with friends, trying to make light of something so heavy. But deep down, I was angry. Angry at him, at myself for not recognizing it sooner, and at the situation I'd been put in. Slowly, I started telling a few close friends. Their support gave me the courage to take action. I reached out to my school's Title IX office to file a report. I wanted documentation, even if it didn't lead to formal charges. My main request was an informal resolution. I wanted him to step down from the design group, apologize to me, and disclose what he did to any current or future partners. I also asked that he attend consent education and consider therapy. Title IX worked quickly to gather information. When they reached out to him, he admitted to what happened but downplayed it as part of learning intimacy. I made it clear to the investigator that this wasn't about inexperience. It was about violating boundaries. The investigator reassured me I was doing the right thing, and I felt a sense of relief knowing I'd been heard. Then he stopped cooperating. For 2 weeks, he dodged calls and emails from the Title IX office. During that time, I spiraled emotionally. I couldn't stop replaying the worst moments of the relationship in my head. I started drinking more than I should have, and my mental health took a hit. Eventually, I wrote a long, heartfelt letter to the investigator, hoping it would add weight to my case. Finally, after weeks of dodging, he responded, but not how I hoped. He denied everything, claiming the incident was consensual and refusing to comply with any of my requests. The investigator called me with the news, and even though I was half expecting it, it still felt like a punch to the gut. I realized then that he wasn't going to take accountability. But I wasn't done. If he wouldn't own up to his actions, I'd make sure everyone else knew the truth. When I found out he denied everything, I knew I couldn't let him get away with it. His refusal to cooperate with the informal resolution only fueled my determination to hold him accountable. He had dismissed the entire situation as if it didn't matter, and that kind of arrogance pushed me to take things further. I went to the faculty advisor for the design group, someone I trusted, and explained everything. I told him about the assault, the Title IX report, and how it all tied back to the group. I also told him that my presence in the group was no longer sustainable. It wasn't just the emotional toll of seeing my abuser, but the professional friction that his denial created. I needed to resign, but I wanted to do it in a way that exposed the truth. The faculty advisor listened carefully and encouraged me to hold a meeting with the group's elected board. He said I could use the meeting to resign and present my side of the story. I spent the weekend preparing a detailed PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to make sure they understood exactly what had happened, why I was stepping down, and what I believed needed to happen next. On Monday, I called a meeting with the board, without including Jackass X. When they arrived, I could tell they were confused but curious. I began the presentation by announcing my resignation, citing personal reasons. Then I shifted into the real purpose of the meeting. I outlined the relationship I had with Jackass X, the assault that occurred, and the Title IX report I had filed. I explained why I had requested an informal resolution and how he had initially admitted to what happened but later denied everything and refused to cooperate. I showed them the group's own zero-tolerance policies for harassment and highlighted the steps they could take to hold him accountable, including impeaching him from his position. By the end of the presentation, the room was silent. Some of the board members were crying. These were people who had been friends with him, people who probably never thought he was capable of something like this. I was nervous about how they would respond, but to my surprise, they thanked me for coming forward. They told me they needed time to process everything, but assured me they would take action. I left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, but I knew it was necessary. Later that day, I sent a formal resignation message to the group's communication channel. I kept it professional, wishing the group well and directing any questions to the president. That same evening, I went to the faculty advisor's office to debrief. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Jackass X sitting in his car. It hit me then that he had probably just read my resignation message and had no idea what had just happened at the meeting. I ignored him and went inside to speak with the advisor, who reassured me that I had handled everything with grace. The fallout began almost immediately. The elected board confronted him that night, informing him that he needed to resign or face impeachment. He threw a tantrum and sent a mass email to over 700 people, including every current and former member of the group. In the email, he claimed that I had made false allegations, that the school had dropped the investigation, and that he was seeking legal action against me. He also called out his friends for betraying him. The email backfired spectacularly. Instead of rallying support, it raised more questions. People who received the email started reaching out to me, confused about what was happening. I stuck to a simple, professional response. The email should not have been sent, but please don't worry about me. The faculty advisor, the elected board, and even the dean of our school were furious. The advisor confirmed to me that the group banned him from their lab space, and the dean was considering disciplinary action for the unprofessional email. That email, meant to save face, only solidified his reputation as someone trying to cover up the truth. By the next day, he officially resigned. His message was bitter, accusing the group of turning against him and once again denying everything. But the damage was done. He had lost his position in the group, access to the lab he spent most of his time in, and the trust of his peers. In the end, everything he lost was a result of his own decisions. Instead of taking accountability, he doubled down on denial and tried to protect his pride. The fallout was swift and complete. He lost his leadership position in the design group, access to the lab he practically lived in, the respect of his friends and peers, and likely his new relationship. The mass email he sent in a last-ditch attempt to control the narrative only made him look worse, and now the school administration had their eyes on him too. As for me, I finally found closure. It wasn't easy, but standing up for myself and exposing the truth lifted a weight I didn't realize I'd been carrying. The process was messy and emotional, but I don't regret a single step I took. I gave him a chance to do the right thing, and he chose his own destruction instead. I don't know what he's doing now, and I don't care. I've moved on. I'm still in school, still working, and still building the life I want. My closest friends stood by me through all of this, and their support made all the difference. Looking back, I'm proud of how I handled everything. I stayed professional, even when he didn't, and let his actions speak for themselves. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't have to stay silent. You don't have to let people get away with hurting you. Sometimes, standing up for yourself is the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's also the most important. Thank you for reading my story. If you've ever faced something similar, I hope this reminds you that your voice matters. You're stronger than you think.